All right, everybody. So we have Martin MacDonald on the podcast today. Welcome, Martin.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So I know we've talked for a while, a little bit back and forth, and we finally got you on. I think a lot of people are going to be interested to hear what you have to say. So can you just give a little bit about your background and why you're so knowledgeable in all this?
Yeah, so where to start really? I essentially started as a sports nutritionist, and I kind of did the bog standard thing, like go to university, do a good degree, and then I was like, yeah, and I was competing in natural bodybuilding at the time, so I had this kind of real interest in training, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an S&C coach or a physiologist or a nutritionist. And to be honest, at that time, nutritionist was a bit of like a female dominated thing, and it still is. Obviously in a lot of dietetics, I think it's like 90+% female.
That high? Wow.
Obviously in sports nutrition it's a little bit different. And so anyway, it wasn't until someone basically said to me, you should become a nutritionist, because at least in the UK and at least in the sports nutrition world, things were just a bit stale. People were very, very like, you should eat low fat, all athletes should be eating carbohydrates. And I was kind of obviously competing in bodybuilding where there was a lot more low carb element, less performance obviously in bodybuilding compared to maybe some of the typical Olympic sports, but just the body composition aspect. And they said, look, you could be the best at this. And as soon as they said that, I was like, I like the sound of being the best.
Right.
And just love nutrition. I've always loved nutrition and training. So anyway, when I did my master's, and then ended up doing a postgraduate in clinical nutrition, because I ended up working with so many individuals who had, diseases of obesity and just stuff that was related to that aspect, that I wasn't just a sports nutritionist anymore. I wasn't just helping someone lose a little bit of weight. I wanted to be able to at least have some decent insight. I didn't want to be a dietitian. I didn't want to go into hospitals, but I wanted to at least have some understanding of the clinical aspects that I might encounter, even just for the simple fact of being able to refer on or say, what, your doctor told you what? Maybe you should get a second opinion, not to act out my side of my scope of practice and say, stop taking that medication, but just to go, I've heard different. I'm not an expert, but have a look here. So yeah, my work just ended up going wide-ranging, workplace wellness, did lots of corporate wellness programs, individual clients, athletes, Olympians. Like, it was super cool. Early career, started my consultancy, and that's kind of grown from strength to strength. And then 3 or so years ago, which is, I suppose, why it's funny, my goal has always been to be kind of well-known, famous, be an influencer. And an influencer is quite a dirty word now, right?
Yeah, right.
For me, I feel like I've always had something worthwhile offering to the world. And so why wouldn't I want to be well-known? If you offered me money or fame, I would want all the fame. Money's not a driver for me. I just want to be well known, and not just so that people can come up to me and have selfies, although I flipping love selfies, I'm sure you've seen on Instagram, because it's just nice. Like, I just love interacting with people. I'm a bit of a socialite, but to be well known, to have a platform to do good, it just really is something that I absolutely love the thought of. And I have a very small platform, and I, even seeing what I can do with that is just like, feels amazing. So anyway, 3 years ago, we launched this online nutrition qualification, and because it was so good, I hope I don't sound kind of out of turn saying that, but it blew my mind how well people received it, the kind of the quality of the content, but even on top of that, the practicality of, because it is taught by only MSc qualified practicing nutritionists, registered nutritionists, dietitians, people who have been in the trenches. We don't teach anything like not one of our students, well, some of them actually are super geeks, but most of our students wouldn't be able to go, this is the Krebs cycle and glucose 6-phosphate. Most of them won't have heard of those things. And I'm proud of that, because no one needs to know that to the depth that lots of, that I was taught, because, if you need to go down that route of research, or yes, you might need to know it, but if you want to help people in the real world And even more so than when I was a practitioner, I understand so much more about human psychology and behavior, that I sort of realized how little, and I'm sure we might even touch on this on the podcast, but how little lots of the nuances and fancy science stuff that I like to discuss, they don't make a real big difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, the course went massive, and therefore my online profile got a lot bigger. And that's kind of, I suppose, I ended up getting more well known in the industry because of the course, as opposed to me as a practitioner. It's more me as an educator. Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned doing good there as part of your goal with being an influencer, and with this podcast, as we talked about, I kind of want to make sure I'm doing some good in the world too. And so for every one of these, I make a personal donation to a charity, and that's up to you which one I do. So can you tell us which one you chose and a little bit about that charity?
Yeah, cool. This I kind of obviously said to you off air, but it's one of our we have 4 kind of elements of our mission statement, and one of them is about giving back and company profits going to charity. So when you contacted me, I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like, I've never heard of someone do that on a podcast. So it's I really like that element of it. So
thanks.
The charity that I've chosen is quite a difficult one to go, oh, which one? Like, what one do I want to put on there? But I've actually chosen one that lots of people will know through my Instagram, Billy, who's kind of one of our sort of head health and performance nutritionists here, and he's one of the MNU tutors. But he and his family run a charity called the Samantha Maritza Trust. And so I'm sure you'll link it or whatever, but it's Sam's_trust on Instagram, I think. And it's all to do with something that's quite close to my heart, and something that I really like being able to raise awareness of and promote, is this awareness around mental health and mental health issues. So the charity's around that. And so, yeah, that's the one that I want to choose.
Very cool, man. Yeah, great stuff. And I definitely will have a link there. So diving in now to the questions. One of my more recent podcasts was with the guy Ray Cronice, and it was, I think, my most commented on podcast because it was pretty controversial. And one of the things that he had talked about, well, the most controversial part was him talking about not really exercising that much while dieting. So we won't get into that, but he did talk about how he believes people can diet a lot faster than they do. And I've heard you talk about that as well. And I think that's important when we're talking about general population versus, contest bodybuilders. And I would agree that if you are trying to get contest lean, you have to take it a lot slower, of course, than if you're 40 pounds overweight, and you're trying to lose 30 of that. So I guess if you could just talk about how quickly you like to have clients lose weight when people come to you. And of course, there's going to be variation in all of that. But how much faster are we able to lose fat compared to the maybe 1 pound a week that is often told?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I started talking about this in 2015 when I was basically asked to speak to a massive group of evidence-based personal trainers. And the term evidence-based and personal trainer doesn't really go together very often. So I was honestly, I wasn't nervous, but I put a lot of thought into when I present. It's one of my passions. It's one of the things I'm probably most well known for. And I always want to think about the audience and think what they will take away. And I knew this audience had some webinars from me. They'd had teach, I had educated some of their educators, and I knew that they had a really good grounding, and I wasn't going to be able to go in there and go, yeah, keto, carbs don't make you fat, and not everyone needs to eat breakfast. And, I do that in anywhere else, and I'm like, no way.
Right.
Sugar's not toxic, no way. So I thought really hard about how can it was like an 8-hour speaking slot. It's like an hour for lunch and a couple of breaks. So I thought I need to deliver here. One of the key areas, I kind of observed this group and, some of their online stuff. And I realized that they were all such nice people that they were being too moderate in their approaches, and they weren't being evidence-based because they were being too nice. Like, there's this idea that you'll see on the internet, and I won't name any names, but this idea, just give people one habit at a time. If you just give them one habit, then they'll be able to, that's the only sustainable way to help people lose weight, not evidence-based. Like,
Right.
I'm sure there will be people listening to your podcast who still believe that, and it's one of these things. Even as evidence-based practitioners, you have to hear someone like me say that and then go, I believe that, and it'll trigger people, and they'll go, no, you're wrong, Martin. And then your goal is to go away and disprove yourself. Like, that is kind of science. Disprove yourself. If you can't, then you're onto something, and then start working your way. But if you can't, lots of things, and I'm a big proponent of calling myself out when I've had a message and I've told people this happened after all of my degrees and multiple postgraduates. There were certain things I was never taught, and I just picked up, and then someone challenged me, and I was like, okay, let me find a study. Oh my goodness, I'm actually off base. So anyway, this whole one habit at a time. And we know from the obesity research that more rapid weight loss strategies often have better outcomes than more moderate approaches. And I can talk a bit more about some of the quite cool findings of that. But in 2015, I basically realized that we know that clients underreport, for instance. So they're going, I'm going to put this person in a 200 to 250, 300, 400 calorie deficit. They're not losing weight. And or doing, I'm just going to change this habit. I'm going to get them to take one fish oil a day and tick it off on a sheet. And then the next week, I'm going to make them chew their food 20 times. And my clients aren't staying with me. Does anyone know how I can get more clients? No, you don't need to get more clients. You need to retain your clients by doing a better job and doing stuff that has an actual magnitude of effect. And there's this big thing about never put someone on less than 1,000 calories a day. Like, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's almost like it's like 1,000 calories. Anything below that, and you're a bro.
Right.
You're metabolically damaged people, and you're trying to, screw people up. So yeah, I basically went into this talk to basically say to them, stop being so evidence-based. And what I mean by that is stop being so damn nice. Like, stop pussyfooting around. Some people, if they're very short, very light, inactive, female, they might have to diet on less calories than that. And on the flip side of that, regardless of where maybe their BMR or their TDEE may sit, a huge calorie deficit might be more effective. And actually, I wrote an article on this to do with, I think it was to do with dieting to single-digit body fats or something or other, for the Alan Aragon Research Review. But basically looked at this decaying rate of weight loss for people wanting to get to, like you were talking about, the contest type guys.
Right.
And actually having a different speed of weight loss. So if you just literally go, in contest prep, I'm going to go a pound a week. And a pound a week towards the end of your diet, and even, I can't remember the maths that I did, might actually be too fast, and you're definitely going to be losing lean body mass at that rate. But at the beginning, you're losing time. So what needs to happen is this like decaying curve down. I don't know if that's, I can't see myself. Yeah, like down like this. And what that's based on is basically the ability, the amount of fat you have, and the ability to mobilize and make fatty acids available for oxidation and to use as an energy source, as a substrate for, exercise and daily tasks. If you are very, very lean, the ability for agile lipolysis and make those fatty acids available is less. So if you're in a big calorie deficit, and I don't know the author of this study actually, but basically, it begins with B. Anyway, looking at athletes below the level of 10% body fat, and actually that is a key area where lean body mass losses become an issue specifically, and it's probably more related to this mobilization of fat. So the study is by Alpert, and I think it's like 1978, as early as that, but it looked at this, and there was actually a recent update of the paper that looked at this, the rate limiting factor. And you can basically follow the maths on from that and to give people a simple rule. So let's take a Gen Pop client who's 40% female, 40% body fat. So not hugely high for a female, not out of the realms of normality for a weight loss client. Mm-hmm. And essentially you do body fat percentage. In fact, I'm going to use 45. I had a client, one of my recent clients before I stopped working with clients, was 48%. So we'll call her 45% body fat.
How do you test that?
Say again?
How are you personally testing that? I'm just curious.
So she was tested via DEXA. And one thing I will say is every single method we use for testing body fat is a stab in the dark. DEXA is obviously one that people are going, oh, it's the gold standard. But honestly, it's still not really, because it was designed for bone mineral density, as you'll know. That's what it's the gold standard for. The gold standard is a 4-compartment model, which, funnily enough, the Longland et al. 2016 study where they showed muscle gain in a calorie deficit, people are like, no way, that never happened, your study's rubbish. And they literally had done the 4-compartment model, which like no other study in the world does. Everyone, we did skin fold calipers and bicep girth to estimate muscle mass.
Right.
These guys had people doing DEXA bioelectrical impedance analysis, like ridiculous. So yeah, that was via DEXA. So 45% body fat. You divide that body fat percentage by, and I kind of give the initial Alpert study said if you use their data, it's 13. If I think it's Greg Knuckles, but don't quote me on that, has said more like 20 based on their updated stuff. And I, taking that plus all the other fast rates of weight loss studies, I feel like 15 is a good number you can use. If you want to be super conservative, which I don't see why anyone would want to be with a lot of body fat to lose, because lean body mass loss is irrelevant anyway. Like, you'll gain it back so fast. Muscle memory is a thing. And most of your Gen Pop clients, for instance, I'll take this client I'm talking about. She didn't care if she lost some muscle.
Right.
And she was fairly untrained, so it was highly unlikely she was going to, and we could easily gain more muscle than she started with, all of these factors. So yeah, if you've got a comp prep bodybuilder, maybe go to 20. So yeah, divide that 45 by 15 gives you 3, and that's 3% of current body weight, and she was very heavy.
Right.
I think she was about 125 kilos-ish. So you go, let's call it 120 kilos, you go 3% of your 120 kilos, and suddenly, what was it, 1 pound you used in the example? So that's like 484 grams, like half a kilogram. Suddenly, you go 3% of 120, 1% of 120 is 1.2 kilograms. So we're talking 3.6 kilograms a week possible, which is then like, what, 7.2 and a fifth, so like 7.9 pounds a week potentially this lady would be able to lose in purely fat mass.
I think I might have, maybe I heard you wrong, or maybe you misspoke. Did you say 15 would be more conservative? Because I would think that'd be more aggressive, right? You'd end up getting a
Sorry, I did say that. What you're saying is correct. 15 is slightly more aggressive. 20 is more conservative.
Okay.
So yeah. So for instance, if we go conservative, you can go. What numbers was I using? 45. So 45 divided by 20, and that will give you a more conservative figure.
Right. Okay. And so this would apply even for.
There's a fast rate, right? Go on, you go.
Oh, so yeah, I'm just thinking. A lot of the people who watch this, we definitely have some general population who might be 40-45%. I think a lot of the population is people who have been lifting, I would say like intermediate lifters. But let's use somebody like myself. So I've been lifting for, depending on how seriously I take it, 12 to 14 years, I would say. So I'm pretty much have all the muscle mass I'm going to have. And if let's say I'm 205 pounds now, I don't know, let's say 15%, but again, that's a visual. So if I want to get to 185, right, I'm going to be beach lean. I'm definitely not going to be close to contest lean. You would still use that formula and give us, if you could maybe use those real world numbers, roughly how fast do you think somebody could get there?
Yeah, cool. That's amazing. So if you said, what did you say, body weight? 205?
Yeah, and let's say roughly 15%. Okay, so let's say a little over 30 pounds of body fat.
Perfect. So in that instance, let's just make it even easier. So if we go 200 pounds and 15% body fat, so we do the simple thing of 15% divided by 15, so 1%. And so in that instance, if you wanted to be 100% sure and be conservative that you wanted to lose only fat mass, and this is day-to-day basis, but also cumulative for the whole of your diet, and people forget this, and if they don't listen to all of, like, I've kind of got some lectures on this, if they forget that if they're doing this, and I'll talk about how you do this pragmatically, actually. This is going to be a good podcast, by the way. So, in your instance, it was 15 divided by 15 is 1, and that's 1% of total body weight, and 1% of 200 pounds is 2 pounds. So we're going to be looking for 2 pounds a week. And then what you do for that is you then work out the supposed calorie deficit you would need to lose 2 pounds a week, which, nicely enough, most people know this, 3,500 approximately, if we just ignore all of the stuff that Kevin Hall's done disproving that because he's too clever. But approximately, because you're going to misreport anyway. So we're going to look for a 7,000 calorie deficit per week to lose these 2 pounds. The problem is if people do any kind of refeeds or changes in that affects the macro. So you can't just go 1,000, because what I would personally do is so that's 7 days, 1,000 calorie deficit each day. I personally would go like 1,500 calorie deficit a day. The reason I do that is I feel better that way. As a process, and I can talk about this a bit about this, but as a process and for my adherence, it's better. The thing that happens then is I lose lean body mass. But what people need to remember is when you lose lean body mass, it's not necessarily myofibrillar proteins we're talking about. It's things like muscle glycogen. So we need to dip into other sources because we can't purely use fat. So you will then start to become glycogen depleted. Then my personal preference is to do that for a period and then do a refeed period of whatever it is suitable for me at that time. If I'm wanting to maybe try and have some small beneficial metabolic and hormonal effects, I'll try and do a refeed for 72 hours. If it's just for me, for pleasantries, for social, it might just be a single day, for instance. But then I look at, I dieted on a 1,500 calorie deficit for 2 weeks, but on day 14, I had all of these extra calories, and my average over that should come out somewhere around 1,000 a day, if I want to purely be losing lean body mass. So in your instance, what would happen is you would have to have this decaying thing if you don't want to lose muscle. So you would start at 2 pounds. And obviously, once you've lost those 2 pounds, your body fat percentage is going to go down by a very small amount, obviously. So then that 2 pounds needs to go, eventually it'll be 1.5 and 1.5. This is if you don't want to lose any muscle whatsoever. And you're going to get very lean doing so. So that's where this kind of moderate rate has come from. Fitness industry, personal trainers. If every personal trainer is 15% body fat and less, they do need to diet slowly or they're going to lose muscle. They need to diet slower than 2 pounds a week. But even then, lots of people focus on 1/2 to 1 because that's going to make you look better on stage, bro. But it's not the case.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make, because if people just hear, oh, you can actually diet way more aggressively, they might think, oh, great, I'm 15%, I can lose 5 pounds a week. But even, with this decaying, rate, you're still probably looking at about 15 weeks to lose that 20 pounds. We're not talking an incredibly rapid pace here if you're already lean compared to 30-40% body fat.
Exactly. That's what we have to remember. The way bodybuilders do it is maybe, in my opinion, often wrong in the early stages of their diet, But actually, when you get closer to the show, almost the slower the better, getting ready a bit earlier, a bit like the whole kind of 3DMJ methodology. If you're aware of any of that, it's great. But for clients who most people should, I know as personal trainers, lots of people are like, tell me again about muscle gain. It's like, how many muscle gain clients do you have? None. It's for me. But for your clients, it's a different ball game. They're not single digit body fats. They're not in the 20s, et cetera, et cetera. So, and they don't necessarily want to step on stage. So going back to that client of mine, she just wanted to be smaller. She wanted to be smaller in her clothes. She wanted to be more mobile, everything. Losing some muscle on her legs, they would feel smaller in jeans and she would be happier. I'm not talking about like putting on a 0 protein diet or anything crazy. She's still going to exercise, but it's she doesn't care about whether she loses a little bit of lean body mass, which I'm fairly sure it would be almost impossible in her case because of the newbie gains. But either way, they don't mind so much. They're not stepping on stage.
Right. And I don't know if you factor this in when you're teaching as well, but I know if somebody comes to me as a client and they ask for help, I'll factor in train age in the sense that I feel more comfortable being more aggressive in the diet if they're less experienced, because if they lose a little bit more lean body mass, the second that dieting phase is over, they're going to get that back and then surpass it relatively quickly. Versus if somebody's really advanced, it's like they're just trying to hold every little bit. They might really be happy that they dieted down and had 1 pound more muscle than last year. So it's a little different.
Yeah, like natural bodybuilders are a different breed. You know, like ones that have been competing for like 10 years. It's like, how can you do it? It's just such a painstaking process. Like you have literally described the scenario. I've got 1 pound more muscle for a year's worth of training, 6 days a week, and every single meal was on point. And it's like, man, like I wish I had that kind of stayability with any part of my life. So yeah, it's it is a different scenario with those guys.
You mentioned a little bit there the refeed and how it's going to vary depending on your reason. You know, if it's just social, obviously one day could work. So obviously it's going to depend on your reason for doing the refeeds. But I think in the last year, maybe 2 years now, these longer diet breaks have become a lot more popular. You know, people have kind of shown, well, there's really not that much of a hormonal difference or metabolic difference from one day. Obviously, there are some people who go crazy on cheat days, and maybe we can talk about the issues with having these like massive binge single cheat days. But I think there's been some good evidence showing that a slight surplus for a longer period of time, you know, just getting out of that dieting phase for maybe even like a week, has a lot of benefits. So I don't know how much you've implemented that. Yeah.
So this is one of those areas like, so cheat meals and cheat days are really, I can't remember. I think I did a post on this basically saying it would be amazing if we could just leave them. Maybe that was in 2018. I don't know. But yeah, basically let's like 2020, let's have a year when no one says cheat meal or cheat day. Unfortunately, because of people like The Rock, he won't be going away anytime soon, but he's often someone I use in kind of educational settings of like, he can get away with it. And he is, there are both physiologicals, there are screwy things that cheat meals and days do, both physiologically and psychologically. The physiological is not so damaging in that it's just stupid. There's no benefit physiologically, and it sets you further back because you eat an inordinate amount of calories in a short period of time. And some people think that the body doesn't realize. And it's like, oh, it's okay, I ate 10,000 calories, but it probably can't store that many. So after like 3,000, it probably just go through you. And it's like, no, your body's really freaking good at absorbing, at digesting, absorbing, assimilating, storing all of that energy from dairy milk that you consumed. So it's an issue, and people go, oh, you know, I've been dieting for this long, and they forget the cheat day they had the day before they started, the day after, and it's like, no, I'm sorry, but look at the cumulative. If you look at the cumulative and you average out the calories from T-1 and, you know, the day after you finished, you're in a maintenance because of those 2 stupid days where like probably your stupid prep coach told you could have a cheat day because it'll just boost your metabolism, bro. This doesn't happen. So a small continuous surplus over about 72 hours has a small positive impact on certain things like thyroid, T3, small positive impact on like total energy expenditure over the day. It increases leptin slightly. So all of these things are positive. The actual magnitude of their effect overall is a slightly more difficult discussion. Because you have this discussion of, okay, for instance, a week or 2 weeks at like a 65% carbohydrate diet at maintenance or slightly above maintenance will restore some of the metabolic adaptations that occur with dieting. So essentially it's metabolism raising. You are slightly more wasteful with your energy, etc. The problem is the small benefits that has, we then don't know. There's not, to my knowledge, been any comparison between someone who, let's say, diets for 20 weeks like this versus someone who diets for, say 10 weeks, 2-week break and another 8 or 10 weeks. And that would be a discussion in the study design of, are we going to compare based on 20 weeks time, or are we going to compare based on dieting time?
Right.
Lots of research doesn't do that well, which is very annoying. So lots of the fast weight loss research that you will see people in the fitness industry quoting when they're like, oh, don't crash diet, bro. And obviously crash diet is not a defined terminology, but when people go, oh, Martin MacDonald, look at this study by Garth et al., look at this study. And the problem is they're comparing apples and oranges. They'll compare a 4 weeks, a study that has compared a fast and slow rate of weight loss, but the fast group only dieted for half the time. And then they'll go, the group that dieted for 8 weeks had slightly better outcomes. It's like, hold on, you're comparing 4 weeks versus 8. Give my 4-week group the 4 weeks that your group was still dieting to eat at maintenance, because they both lost the same body fat, but your group managed to train a bit better. My group were at maintenance for 4 weeks. Then let's compare. But that isn't done in the studies. Or,
Right.
like testosterone is when they do same time for time, it's like, oh, this group was on a large calorie deficit, like 4.4 pounds versus 2.2 pounds. They dieted for the same amount of time. It's like, look, testosterone was significantly lower in the fast rate of weight loss group. And it's like,
Right.
yeah, and they lost twice as much body fat. It's like, diet your group for twice the time to get to the same body fat, then test their testosterone. So anyway, it's a little rant of mine.
Yeah.
So this thing of, okay, we're comparing 20 weeks or 22 weeks, etc. We know that it's a bit of a discussion, really, is in that 2 weeks of maintenance. The way I do this, so I call it like multiphasic and multifaceted dieting strategies. So this multiphasic is this, what we're discussing here, of dieting in phases. So you might have an aggressive phase, you might have more moderate periods, and this is where you tie things in to the client that you're working with and their lifestyle. You can plan ahead and then adjust based on what happens in real life. I'm not going to have any stresses with work at this time. I'm going to be able to hit the gym hard and do this, versus, I'm not going to be able to prep my any of my food at this time. I'm going to be eating out loads. Therefore, you take all of this information and you put it into, right, this could be a good aggressive stage. This we might just maintain. We might look at eating just purely through habits and no calorie tracking, for instance. And that, I call that like coaching to live. Like if you have periods, if we are talking about Gen Pop clients, coaching them to live. So through this process, like, oh, what do I do after my diet? Oh, well, you remember that 2 weeks where you didn't calorie count and you didn't weigh any food and you just used rough habits and you did these things. That's what we're going to try and mimic in your real life now, rather than building habits that are only habits that lead to weight loss and fat loss and dieting strategies. So looking at these different phases and looking at hunger, looking at motivation, etc. For me, the benefit is more currently based on current evidence. The strength is within, it's a tool in the toolbox, as opposed to some strong physiological benefits. So I'm sure you're aware of the Matador study. which they basically, it was a 16-week study and dieted two groups, one on a consistent calorie deficit for 16 weeks and this blows my mind still to this day, because when you hear the study, you're like, oh, the other group who only dieted for 8, you'd think, oh, they doubled the deficit, but they didn't. They literally said, diet for 2 weeks on the same as the other group. The groups are the same in the first 2 weeks. The week 3 and 4, nothing. Just chill out. Just chilled out vibe. Don't think about dieting. Get on with your life. Weeks 5 and 6, you're dieting again. Chill out for 2 weeks. So they literally dieted in the same way, but for only half the time, interspersed. And the outcomes of the study were that the intermittent group, or the group with bi-weekly kind of diet breaks, ended up better off. And so there's discussions around, okay, did that impact NEAT a lot? Did it impact adherence a lot? And lots of these things are difficult to pull out of the data, but it's just interesting, and it adds weight to what you're kind of discussing here of like these diet breaks, or these I call those diet breaks versus refeeds, which are a bit shorter and a bit more strategic.
Right.
Maybe aggressive. So I know there are currently some studies going on using only, I think, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. And it's just an interesting area to look at, especially as to its effects on metabolic adaptation. So we know that there are these profound effects with fat loss of slowing of metabolism, A, through just weighing less, but B, through these adaptations that happen in the body. And a big proportion of that is a reduction in just wasteful movement and energy expenditure. To the order of like 600 calories a day is gone that you didn't know about, just because you fidgeted less and you did a few less steps, but without realizing. So yeah, it's a super interesting area. And for me at the minute, it's like, it's cool to do with clients. It's cool if it makes sense to do it, if it's a holiday, or if it's a period where they're super stressed and you don't want to add further stress through dieting. It can be useful.
Awesome. I think a lot of these studies, a lot of things you're talking about, it's, they look and they say, well, this one had a benefit, but like you said, if you had another 4 weeks with that group, it would kind of even out, or maybe that one would be better. As I'm subscribed to Mass, that like Greg Nuckols and them all do, and I think it's a great resource, but a lot of the time the conclusion is kind of like, didn't make that much of a difference, and I think that's just kind of the case with a lot of things. I talk about it. It's the worst thing for me as a coach to talk about, is how much stuff doesn't matter. But thankfully, since this is not really how I make anywhere near like my primary income, I can be very honest and blunt about things. I don't feel pressure to sell it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I really do have to say that most things don't matter that much, and some things matter a lot, but it's a small list. Your genetics are obviously huge. Consistency is huge. Obviously, you should be lifting weights progressively over time. But that's do that for 5-10 years, and that's really your results. And I don't want people to think there's no difference with any of these things. I think if you're like me and you, and you really like to look into those details, it's cool to talk about. Yeah. I think it can make 5% difference, maybe 10 if you're talking about like all of these things together. But at some point, I'm not going to have 60 podcasts on how nothing matters, right? So yeah. That's why we delve into some of these details. So I kind of wanted to ask you, it matters for me personally, but I think some people are interested in inflammation, and that's obviously a term that people hear, and they hear it's kind of almost like a bro-y term. So yeah. I've personally dealt with inflammatory issues, and not like I said, not like, oh man, I got to deal with my inflammation, bro, but like medical inflammation issues. So for me, I'm particularly interested in it, but just in general, some things I know that you've talked before about saying multivitamin, which I don't know when you said that, but I think there is some controversy even with that, fish oil. And I think there was like one other supplement you talked about recommending for a lot of people. I wanted to get your opinion on curcumin, and how that relates, because I feel like I've seen quite a bit of evidence for that. So that's one. And then two, keto, again, obviously a super buzz term now. It's obviously nothing new. It's been around for a very long time, and it has actual like medical uses, like for seizures and things like that. I've talked to Dom D'Agostino. I have no idea if you have any opinion on him, but he seems to really be a proponent of it from an anti-inflammatory perspective. So obviously one's diet, one's supplement, but again, I just kind of want to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah. So we'll start with the most commonly used term, I suppose, that people have heard of is like turmeric, which is, curcumin, however you want to say it, wherever you are in the world. And so it's this spice that people are aware of, and it's this part of the spice, the curcumin. And yeah, it's the evidence is strong as far as I'm concerned with regards to anti-inflammatory. And if people were suffering with numerous different things that obviously, in fact, there's a real bro. I'm trying to think of his name. Am I allowed to name names?
Go for it.
Yeah. He's the super jacked American. He's like an American footballer. I can't believe Thomas DeLauer. I don't know if you come across him.
The name.
He's like, this is the secret. I found this secret. This is more important. He's this guy who's like macros and keto, and he's like, the best snack you can get is pork scratchings because they're keto. And like, he's just a full-on bro, and like, I think probably making a lot of money by misleading people. And he did this thing that I think he must have put thousands into the kind of ads machine.
Oh wow, really?
Get this everywhere. And he basically was like, macros and keto and even having a protein shake after training, none of that matters. And as much as this thing I'm going to tell you, click the link in my bio, buy this thing. And it was turmeric. And then he was like,
really?
Turmeric, like anti-inflammatory. And so he's sort of taken a little bit of truth, i.e. yes, but we obviously have this understanding that you can potentially dampen the response from training by using things that reduce inflammation, like your antioxidants, like your vitamin C's, your vitamin E's, these sort of things. So you have these in super high supplemental doses, and they can actually lower the signal for adaptation to get better. So he's going, you need to have this curcumin, whatever tablet or powder in your shake, etc. But anyway, so for people with, for instance, joint issues, it's certainly up there. I think I'm right in saying that the strength of research would be a lot stronger for that than for something that is super well known, like glucosamine sulfate supplementation. So I've got some kind of interesting views on glucosamine. I won't go into them because they're not even dots connected in my head. But as a general rule of thumb, it's not a super mega effective joint healing supporting supplement that it's kind of touted to be. But we'll save that.
I feel like that's been established for a while. I remember looking into it in like late high school, and I feel like even then, seeing that there really wasn't a ton of evidence for it.
Yeah. But yet it's still like the major thing that flies off the shelves for people with, I'm 60 now, my joints are hurting, and straight away they'll just walk into a health food shop. You need glucosamine, it fixes you. So where was I? So yeah, turmeric for those kind of things, like decent. The keto thing is a funny one. These are my thoughts, right? So I've worked with so many people and even interacted with thousands, probably tens of thousands of people now, around forums, around social media, around the internet, through clients, through talks, etc. It must be tens of thousands. So I come across a lot of people with different diseases and issues, inflammatory issues, and even so, for instance, who's a guy I was speaking to? He had not MS. He had, anyway, I can't remember off the top of my head. I should probably Google it on my phone. But anyway, some of these things, like we are still trying to understand some of these diseases and what might help. Even if we talk about like autoimmune diseases, people like cut out gluten. And there is this very, very, very small bit of animal data that shows there's some stuff to do with antibodies for Hashimoto's, and it's so pointless. You shouldn't bother, but there is this tiny bit of evidence. And so like I'm completely open to the thing of someone finding something somewhere somehow that there is an impact. The thing with keto is, and I said this actually on a podcast recently, that keto isn't a fad. Keto isn't some stupid souped up shake or pill. It's something that we know has, like, ketosis is a state of the body which has profound effects on your physiology. And so we know that, for instance, drug-resistant epilepsy, which again I mentioned on that podcast, is hugely impacted by a ketogenic diet. So to go, no, keto is just another way to be in a calorie deficit. For fat loss, yes. Like keto does not undermine the laws of thermodynamics. It's not a magic cure for fat loss, although if it does help you particularly with appetite suppression, which it isn't a universal rule of keto, fantastic. But then you get onto this way that it changes metabolites and the changes in the kind of glycolytic system, etc., and you relying on ketones as a fuel source, and what that might do to the brain, etc., etc., etc. So the caveat I would put on this is, and I'm still in I'm like having two conversations here, the one out loud and the one in the back of my head going,
trying to figure out the disease name.
I can even remember his name, Chris. Chris. And what did he have?
It was an inflammatory condition?
Yeah. It's a really obvious one. Loads of pain, debilitating pain all day long.
To not MS?
Maybe it was MS. I don't think it was MS. Anyway, because my friend's mum's got MS, and that's why I was thinking MS, because again, doing that. Anyway, I'll try to stop. I'll get it out of my head. I'm probably going to look this up after the podcast and message you.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Fibromyalgia.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. I knew it was there. He and probably a few dozen people over the years regarding fibromyalgia, and they have tried, because of the internet, ketogenic diets, and at least 25% of them have felt like they noticed a difference. And this is a slightly different scenario we're talking about here, but the thing I think you have to bear in mind is a calorie deficit, as much as that's almost become a layman's term, a negative energy balance, and as much as it's like, oh, all you ever talk about is just eating less, but being in a negative energy flux reduces inflammation in the body.
I was going to say, maybe did those people lose weight? Those 25%?
No, they're not. These are just social type scenarios.
Yeah.
These aren't clients.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but if someone goes on keto, I find it very, very hard to believe in the first week or two they won't be in an energy deficit until they learn to do the thing that keto people learn to do, and that's put butter on everything and put bacon wrapped in it. It's like everyone loses weight on keto at first, and then they go, bacon's keto, and then they manage to maintain body weight eating bacon, butter, coconut oil, and olives and avocado. So, this is one of the sort of caveat is if someone goes on and it's like the vegan diet, oh my goodness, my joints felt so much better when I went vegan. And it's like, you lost some body weight, you were eating like crap before, and then you ate better and you ate some more vegetables. And we know if you go on an anti-inflammatory diet, which does, I will say, have different definitions depending on who you speak to, and within the research, different people have tried to clarify that in different ways. You've got the inflammatory index that's I can't remember who created, but essentially eating a healthier diet helps with inflammation. Mm-hmm. But then can we go a step further with a ketogenic diet? And that's where I'm certainly not convinced, but I'm certainly not saying there's not something that's potentially useful on top of that. But it's, if you do look at, for instance, the more basic weight loss studies where you have a ketogenic diet or a low carbohydrate, high fat diet versus lower fat diets, and you look at some of the inflammatory markers, the interleukins, C-reactive proteins, whatever you're looking at, they all do kind of improve. Keto does often improve a little bit more, and sometimes that reaches statistical significance. Is it also just because they were in a slightly greater calorie deficit because they were adhering slightly more because they were less hungry because of ketosis? I don't know. Right. So does that give my thoughts in an okay way?
Yeah. I was going to say right before that, I wish more people did measure. And then, like, obviously I'm not expecting the average person to go get a ton of blood work, but just out of my own curiosity, I have, and I've tested CRP and ESR, things like that. And it's hard because a lot of these studies, there is somewhat of a deficit, or people just happen to lose weight. And so, well, not happen to, they happen to lose weight because of the deficit. But, and so the inflammatory markers change. And it's like, well, then how do we know what's going on here? It can be difficult. Now, I personally made sure to eat the same calories on keto. And so it was interesting to see what happened with that. It's pretty hard for me to maintain on keto. I'm literally like drinking oil, and it's disgusting actually. And I usually have a big appetite, but CRP, it did go down a little bit. It wasn't like a dramatic change. I felt better at times, but at the same time, like all that oil, I think maybe if you're in a deficit with keto and you're not chugging oil, then it's probably a little bit more helpful from the inflammatory standpoint.
Yeah, I think there's also the other factor of, like, there's many definitions of a ketogenic diet, isn't there? So
yeah, sure.
Or not definitions, but there's many
ways people apply it. So you've got you can have a fairly healthful Mediterranean-esque ketogenic diet, or you can just be a bit of a moron and eat no vegetables and all of your fat coming from a very narrow spectrum of fatty acids, etc. So also one thing that I will just say, and because it's nice to say stuff like this on air, because if in like 5 years time a study shows this, then I can go, I said this. Right. I have this belief, and we'll call it a belief because it's currently a hunch, and so I suppose it's not like a strong belief, but it's a hunch, and it is based on data and physiology, plausible physiology and mechanisms. But essentially, I think a lot of the benefits that you see with like intermittent fasting, keto, lower carbohydrate methodologies, and when I say intermittent fasting, I mean anything from windowed eating to 5-2, which obviously like an extreme couple of days, to alternate day fasting, which is an even more extreme single day. I think some of the benefits to be seen in those situations are potentially of higher magnitude than is currently seen in studies, but they are so transient that it's just an initial impact. So if you have completely full muscle glycogen, liver glycogen, because you've been in a calorie surplus and on a super high carbohydrate and maybe high fat diet at the same time, calorie excess, unhealthful lifestyle, no exercise. If you, and you've got this kind of metabolic inflexibility simply due to the fact that you're becoming essentially pre-diabetic and consistently elevated insulin levels and et cetera. So you have someone whose respiratory quotient, respiratory exchange ratio, essentially they're a carb burner, is like what the industry would call them. And rather than someone needing to be low carb or keto for a long period of time, if you just have this initial period where you just bring carbohydrate levels from absolute maximum, super compensated, athlete level carbo loaded glycogen levels to something that is more moderate, or just
essentially giving that person and that person's body a pool, a sponge, a bucket that muscle mass is. And one of the, we know that some of the metabolic diseases and blood glucose dysregulation with aging, if we lose a lot of muscle mass, that is a place we can put blood glucose away into. And so if someone actually doesn't have that because it's just constantly topped up, so with a windowed eating protocol or a single day fast or just going low carb for a day or two, so that they bring these levels down from maximal, actually the whole system might be able to just work a little bit better, because there is this thing that on a meal by meal basis, they're able to shuttle away some of the blood glucose and insulin can come back down and they can go back to being a fat burner. And obviously, all of this is dictated by energy balance in terms of how much fat you will lose. So a fat burner doesn't mean you're losing fat, but it's just meaning you might be relying more on fatty acids for your stable energy levels. So that's just one of my thoughts around this area of like keto and low carb and fasting, etc. Is that it might just be bringing us down from this basically maximal muscle glycogen, liver glycogen levels, so that we're just able to better regulate something that's quite important, which is our blood glucose. So anyway, just a random thought.
No, fantastic. So this is actually something I've gotten a few questions on. Doesn't actually apply to me that much because I don't drink that much alcohol, but I think a lot of people who, if they've been in this for a little while, I think they kind of know it's not this huge issue to have, moderate amounts of alcohol. But I still do get the question quite a bit if somebody is new to working with me. So can you just give like some general guidelines? I think if I've seen some of your posts, I think you do drink, right?
Yeah, I actually don't. It's fun. I'm a real funny one, right? I don't like the taste of any alcohol, I don't think. Like I quite like mojitos when I'm on holiday, just mainly because I think they put sugar, don't they, around the rim of the glass? And I love sugar. And is there another drink I like? Bailey's with like a pint of milk occasionally, like once every 5 years. But anyway, I don't actually like the taste of alcohol, but I do drink simply from a kind of celebration / partying. So when I did my tour earlier this year, I would go out and party at all the events, and at all of our graduations of our students, I'll always drink. So I've kind of got this reputation for being a bit of a drinker. When I didn't drink at university. I was like that guy with a Diet Coke bottle in his hand because I didn't want to order a pint of Diet Coke because I didn't want them to just click the one with full sugar, because I didn't want to drink like 5 liters of full sugar. So I would always buy the more expensive bottle so I knew what was in it. So anyway, and then also the fact that I just for some reason have lost the ability to get a hangover, which is bizarre. I got tagged in a story. Someone had asked a question to a guy with I think he's got a PhD or maybe just a professional doctor or something or other. He did his master's thesis in the hangover and its effects on something or other. Anyway, he was like, is it true? Is Martin MacDonald lying about not getting hangovers, or is that really possible? It's so funny. So anyway, I kind of get asked like the alcohol questions all the time, and I don't know why I don't get hangovers, and I also think the way I do it is probably, or almost certainly not the most helpful way to do it, because it is essentially binge drinking. So don't copy me. I'm not trying to influence people in that way. But as a general rule, the interesting thing with alcohol is that if you look at the research and a lot of the kind of epidemiological research, abstaining from alcohol versus drinking a very small amount of alcohol, you're healthier. Now, the problem is that is massively confounded by the fact that you get essentially people who have had issues with alcohol who then become complete abstainers, teetotal, who then have also got the knock-on health effects that has had. So it's a bit of an issue. Now, I think from a lifting perspective, recovery perspective, there's a limited amount of data, but there was the interesting rugby player study where they got them to do a decent training session, and then they gave them, I believe there was a few groups, but it was something like water, whey protein and carbohydrate, and whey protein and vodka.
Yeah.
And do you know this study?
I've heard of it. I don't remember the outcome.
It's such a it's just hilarious. But the amount of vodka, I think, in the study was the equivalent of, I think, about 12 shots of vodka. And that's in this small peri-workout period.
Wow.
As opposed to what someone might do, which is train in the day and then they'll be going out 4 to 6 or, however many hours later, 2 to 6 hours later, wherever we are. Which we then don't have the data on so what happened in that instance was the alcohol, is it dampened the muscle protein synthesis response to the whey protein. So it's like, oh geez, you're going to get less jacked if you drink alcohol. And then the thing is,
shots after training.
Yeah, who's doing it? No one, other than maybe
after you won a game or something.
Yeah. So on a weekend, you can think, okay, these players may legitimately be playing on a Saturday and going soon after and drinking a copious amount of alcohol. And if they then have a Tuesday game, for instance, because of match fixtures and this, that, and the other, they may have a protein shake after the game. And actually, they may not be getting into, after a game, lots of people are destroyed. You've got bad DOMs. We know that kind of rate of force development will be lower in the day after. We're trying to maximize recovery so that by Tuesday we can play again. Again, it's like, is it going to make that big a difference? Like, we've only dampened, it's not switched it off, for instance. And this is with like binge, 12 shots of vodka. So I think the impact is much smaller. Lots of people are like, Martin, I just wondered, I was told that if you drink alcohol, you can't lose body fat. I like a drink. I'm currently on my own weight loss journey. I've lost 20 pounds and I like to drink. Can you let me know? And I was like, what's the question? You've just told me you drink and you've lost 20 pounds. Are you worried that your scales are broken? Like, there is this idea that it's magical because alcohol is a preferential fuel source and you'll oxidize other substrates, macronutrients, carbohydrate, fat, etc., less when it's in your system. But it's not this, if you're drinking regularly and in large amounts, it's going to reduce recovery, definitely. It's not going to be good for your health. Regularly in very small amounts, and I'm talking like one very small, we're probably talking like, 3 to 4 glasses of wine a week. It's like your Mediterranean optimal whatever, but even then it's there's people in the blue zones who probably drink, or who certainly are documented as drinking more than that in some of them. Even some of them, the blue zones being the healthiest people in the world. So there's pragmatically, it's like, live your life, like, don't get consumed by like, oh, I want to get as jacked as possible, so I'm never going to go out and socialize and never drink. Like, you don't have to drink to socialize. That's what I kind of always tell people at my events. They're like, oh, I want to come to the after party, but I don't drink. And I'm like, brilliant. Loads of people at the after parties don't drink. And sometimes my staff don't drink because they have to drive me home the next day. So, like, they have a great time. And like, occasionally when I'm speaking at events, conferences, like, I'll go out because I love socializing and partying and not drink. So that's the first thing. Secondly, like you said earlier, I've been, I've got as much muscle as I'm probably going to have. And then it's a case of, therefore, as natural trainers, it's like, then what's your next most important thing? If it's part of your social life, it's part of your psychological health. If you really love the taste of these horrible drinks, I don't understand why people like the taste of beer and then live your life. It's so difficult to give like specific recommendations because it's just not going to impact. It's like an if it fits your macros, bro, question. Like, it is calories. There's 7 calories per gram of alcohol. You use it in the same way you would your, like, carbohydrate, for instance. But excess drinking is like, we're fairly aware it's not ideal.
Do you mentioned how there's that kind of confounding variable with the fact that light drinkers sometimes are seen as healthier than non-drinkers, but right, that's what you said.
Yeah.
And because non-drinkers, that is a lot of times people who have had serious alcohol problems in the past. So do you believe there's any benefit to small amounts of drinking? I know people say wine and because of, things that are in that. But I don't know if they factored in that variable.
Yeah, this is another kind of hunch, or at least you could obviously argue the kind of epidemiological data, whichever way you want to. My opinion is it might be helpful and helpful for people who don't pay attention to their health that much. So, for instance, we know that consuming alcohol will reduce platelet aggregation. So essentially, and one of the things that is you often see associations within the research is lower stroke risk in these individuals. So there's mechanistic support for it being beneficial. But if you are someone who's very unlikely to have a stroke because you eat really healthy, you do exercise, you eat oily fish, you maintain your body weight through your life cycle, then no, I don't think I would never say to a teetotaler, do you know what? You might actually live a little bit longer if you just had a bit of red wine.
Right.
You can then go down the route of making arguments for things like your sort of phytoestrogens, your lignans. Resveratrol is the super famous red wine anti-aging thing. And, I think it's either mice or rat studies. There's been, oh my goodness, it's affecting PPAR alpha pathways and all this stuff. And like, look at this, we should all be doing this. And the CERT diet, all of this SIRT, if anyone wants to look up that, it's all just like this crazy biochemistry, geeky crap that it's like, forget about it. It doesn't make any difference to real human beings.
Yeah, and I think it also, those are things that you might not just be getting in your normal diet, but a lot of times with supplementation and things, people are already in a normal range and they think more of this thing is better. We've seen that like with vitamin E, people thought, just take a bunch of that, cause problems. I even wonder, and this is not something I've looked heavily into, but a lot of people talk about metformin and how it's this like longevity agent. And I'll see people talk about taking it and they have like an HbA1c of 5. And I'm like, why are you taking metformin? And again, I'm not an expert on that, but it just seems to me a little unnecessary.
Yeah, that this is one issue, and this genuinely is such a cool podcast. I'm like, it's so cool talking to you because you're just like prompting all these cool discussions. You've thought about this stuff so much. I just feel like I'm gonna like say to my followers, like, you guys are gonna geek out on this podcast. So because it's almost, we're not able to go into loads of depth and all these things, but I know me listening to this, like back in the day when I used to listen to podcasts, I'd be like, oh, what's that? Oh, I'm going to go read about this.
Yeah.
But like these ranges of HbA1c, and they can just kind of move within this big range, and not like even a movement up doesn't necessarily correlate to a worsening of health. And even, for instance, triglycerides is one that people get a bit obsessed with, I think. And it's like, oh, look at the triglyceride change when you move from a lower carbohydrate to a higher carbohydrate diet. But it's like, yeah, there was a movement, but we're talking a few percentage points that is still complete. But it's like, oh, but it reached statistical significance. And it's like, statistical significance doesn't mean clinical significance.
Right.
And yeah, so people like the whole metformin thing. People are just, become a bit of a black market thing. It's a bit crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. So I appreciate the kind words on the podcast. I think this has been awesome. I think people are going to hear you and want to delve into all of your stuff. So where can people find more of your work? And also, I know you wanted to touch on a petition that you've kind of put out, if you want to discuss that a little bit as well.
Yeah, cool. So realistically, the best thing that people can do, like my best content, because I'm at the minute, I'm in a time in my life where I'm just like super busy, and I'm my kind of best content is either coming to my tour dates, which I'm desperate to come to the US in 2020. So I would like to do maybe like 4 to 6 different cities in different states to try and get within a few hours drive or flight for people. So my Instagram is where I am most of the time, and on my stories, because I can just do it, like I try and do it like as a bit of an infotainment. I just enjoy it, educate people, answer questions, as well as providing some light humor. And so my link there, like you can, 2 things. One, you can sign up for well, you can follow me and watch my stuff. You can sign up for what I call my Mac mail, which is realistically, if people like any of my work, just get on that email list. Like I'm not an email marketer. I probably send an email a month, unless you then come to one of my events, and then I might send you 2 emails with like the slides and stuff. So that's probably one of the main things. Get on my Mac mail. You can go to my website to get on that as well, just martin-macdonald.com. My future goal is to populate. In fact, just today, one of my new members of staff has been collating all the podcasts that I've been on, because people always say, Martin, do your own podcast. And I'm like, I haven't got the mental space to do such a thing.
Yeah.
But I like coming and talking to people like you, because this is me. Like if you meet me in a bar, this is the same stuff I talk about. Like I don't have much range in conversation. So yeah, I'm basically collating a place on my website which has every podcast I've ever appeared on, and then that will be like my podcast. You can just go and listen to these like 30 different shows, and that'll increase. So website, Instagram, I'm on Facebook and Twitter as the same, at Martin Nutrition, but Instagram's the main one. And yeah, I suppose just my kind of plea to people at the end of this podcast, if you have enjoyed it and you think I've kind of talked some sense and that kind of stuff, is just basically I'm doing this petition. It will end on the 2nd of January, and realistically the letter that we are sending to the government is kind of coming up soon, so the sooner the better. But basically in the UK, there's like this regulation. I don't want to bore the listeners, but essentially power is looking to be given to the wrong people with regard to regulating nutrition in the UK. And that will spread worldwide to some extent in a way as well. And it's kind of this chartered thing. So if people want to just do me a favor, you don't have to sign it without understanding it. Go on, and maybe, can I send you the link? It's like
Absolutely, yeah.
change.org. You can read the kind of 336 word, very expensive letter that I had to have a legal team write up. Unbelievable how much you pay people to write what you already told them to write.
Right.
And just to see what it's about and what it's kind of supporting. And then, we will basically be using that to say, look, I think it's got about 5,000 signatures in less than 20 days so far. But because I was only made aware of this issue, I'm having to do it in such a short space of time. So anyway, yeah, I'll send you the link. If people want to support me, I would really appreciate just hopping on there. And all it is just sign it and say, I support this cause, basically. But it's going to be a small part of the bigger issue of us kind of fighting this thing of people making a bad decision that's going to affect a lot of people, basically.
Awesome, man. Well, I absolutely have that link, the charity link, and link to your Instagram so people can check you out more.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks.